What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from the quarantine zone again, and this time we got Sebastian of Auroch. Thank you for your time today, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yep, it's so awesome to have you here. I really enjoyed your newest album, Stolen Angelic Tongues. Do you just want to talk about how the making of this record was and, like what the thought process was going into it and everything like that?
Yeah, sure. So in 2015 or 16, 20 Buck Spin reissued the first Auroch album, which is called From Forgotten Worlds, and that had come out originally on a kind of more smaller mid-level label out of Poland, really good label though, called Hell Thrasher Productions, and it only ever got a CD run, and aside from a couple North American distros at the time, it was mostly a European release because it's a Polish label, so the album didn't get a ton of hype at the time. But then we signed to Profound Lore afterwards, picked up a bit more steam, and Dave got in touch and wanted to do it. And part of the deal of Dave reissuing that record was that we had to eventually do an EP or a split for him down the road. It was like he would do the reissue if we would eventually give him some original material. So that was supposed to be a split with Evangelist. What happened there is a longer story that I don't really know the answer to, but they had some drama. We didn't want to be associated with that. In the end, push came to shove, and one thing led to another, and eventually we got our way to this EP.
That's awesome. Yeah, like being that this is an EP, is this like intended to almost serve as kind of like a preview or like a movie trailer for what maybe the next full-length Auroch album is going to sound like, or is this just kind of like a once-in-a-blue-moon experimental piece?
A bit of both. A bit of both. Like I think some things that we want to do for the next record are really present on this EP, but it's also a bit of a one-off thing simply because of the fact that we had our original vocalist come back for this one as a bit of a full circle, closing the circle sort of action, and he won't be the lead vocalist on the next album, so in that regard will be quite different. But just in terms of a couple things, like we tried out for the very first time ever recording at our rehearsal space rather than going to a studio. And it was a very interesting experiment because for my ears, I think it wound up just as good. Like we had a friend of ours who's a very good engineer take care of that. So I think we got to test drive a couple things we would like to do for the next record, which will be a much bigger production in doing this EP. So a bit of column A, a bit of column B.
Yeah, despite this record being an incredible, brutal, like thrasher in a way, I thought it was experimental, especially with like those interlude tracks, like the Axis Monday songs I was talking about. So like, it's fair to say you guys like to experiment with your sound, right? It's not like you try to pigeonhole yourselves into one specific genre, right?
Yeah, definitely not. What we want to create with this project, obviously, is death metal, black metal. So that's always the heart of the thing. But it's not the only thing. Like most bands, it's far from the only thing that we sit around listening to. So, different things bleed in, and you take as much influence in the end from something that is not black metal or death metal as you do from something that is a classic black death metal record. So while the music we're trying to create is definitely extreme metal, that's not the only thing influencing it by any means.
Yeah, I mean, I call it like a smorgasbord or a buffet, rather, of extreme music because, like some people like black metal, but they don't like death metal. Some people like thrash metal, but they don't like, either or. So, like, it almost seems like extreme music is so, like, vague to say at this point,
It almost is, but in a lot of ways I kind of prefer it because in my head, at least, I don't create so much of that distinction, or at least I try not to. If we kind of, obviously, like a lot of bands, idolize the era where perhaps there wasn't quite as much separation between it. If you look back to old Deicide called themselves black metal, or Altars of Madness tour Morbid Angel is what influenced so much of the Norwegian scene, or Sarcophago, Sepultura, bands like that. They didn't really create that separation. Or Blasphemy, another great example. So I think we're more influenced by the overall whole of the extreme metal paradigm. So though I agree with you that is a vague term, I do think it describes best what we attempt to do.
Yeah, of course. And I think really in the end it's just a tip of the iceberg. Like I actually discovered you guys on this EP, and then I went back and dived into the rest of your catalog, and I was just like, wow, they really do tackle, like they have a very raw side to them, but also a very technical side to them as well. Where do you like get do these ideas just come out of nowhere for the band, or do you like, is there like a lot of improvising involved, or is there kind of like a preconceived idea of what you want to do?
I think it's just whatever comes up on any given song. Like, we've never really sat down and go, okay, this is going to be a doomy song, or this is going to be a really fast one. And this one, we're really going to show the proggy influence or whatever. It's whatever comes up at any given point goes, really. And we try to be honest with ourselves when something is weak and scrap it. Over the years, of course, we've scrapped a lot of songs. But I think we always just want to push the envelope a little bit. Not so much in terms of what people expect. Like, we never go into a song and go, oh, let's give them this. This is going to be really crazy and weird, and people will think it's so off the wall if we do it. It's more that we would like to push ourselves. So if we're trying to write something really fast, we want to go at a speed that's going to challenge us because we haven't done that speed before, right? And that might be just the overall speed, or that might be a drum beat that's difficult to play at that speed. Or if we want to do something weird, we want to do it because we haven't done that before. So, well, we're not trying to impress so much when we do something weird as we are just trying to try out something new because we've been playing together a long time, and when you play with the same people for a long time, you have to try new things to keep it fresh. And if that ends up being good music, then that's just a happy accident.
Yeah. Well, I mean, aren't you worried that like the songs you scrap one day will be a B-side one day, or just be the biggest hit you guys ever had?
You always wonder that, and of course, when you're a group of people, you disagree over whether or not the song is weak. So sometimes it's to someone's chagrin that the song gets scrapped. So of course, but I suppose you end up putting out what you end up putting out, and we have saved a couple songs over the years, and actually there's some riffs on this one and on the upcoming next one that are very old. So they get recycled and used eventually if they're any good.
Okay. Fair enough. Now, is there ever a time where maybe where lyrics or maybe a concept could determine the outcome of the music itself? I was wondering if, with these Axis Monday interlude tracks, if maybe they kind of served as like part of the conceptual elements of Auroch in a way.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question. Definitely. So it's hard to say what will come first at any point, but the concept for this EP came long before the music did. We've talked about it a little bit, so I'll try not to repeat myself, but in 2015, 2016, myself and Sean, who's the bassist and other vocalist in the band, we became quite fascinated with the writings of a guy named Nikolai Dematos Frisvold, who writes primarily about the African diasporic traditions. So we're talking about voodoo, kimbanda, Santeria, Obeya, and he writes from a bit of a perspective of a Western European occult background, but he does a very interesting job of being extremely sincere and saying who he is and how he's approaching those systems when he does so. He doesn't step on any toes. He's not appropriating or encroaching on anything. So when we started reading his books, and we went crazy for his books over about the course of the year, we dug through them all. We started to find connecting dots to what we were already writing about and talking about and what we were feeling. And we said, okay, we want to approach this in a similar way that the Matos Frisvold does, and we want to approach it as appreciators, not coming at it from an experiential standpoint. So that's probably a big difference between past Auroch releases and this one. We're not talking about something that we've experienced or been through or necessarily even believe in for once. We're talking about something that we appreciate and are looking at as admirers. So that concept came about before the music, to answer your question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, is the concept open to interpretation, or do you try to maybe engage the listener into what like this whole element could be about?
The concept's always open to interpretation. I think it's a little futile to try to control what people get out of the music. We put one thing forward, and if someone else gets something else out of it, who's to say that that's any less valid than the original intention?
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Yeah, I heard somebody once say that you achieve ultimate artistic freedom when you stop worrying about how other people are going to interpret it.
Oh, definitely. I think you'll end up creating something very false or at best just something that you're not pleased with if your primary objective is to worry about how other people are going to take it and hope that they like it and hope that they understand it. So once you put that aside and you just let people appreciate it for how they want to, I think you've reached the pinnacle of what you're capable of.
Yeah, of course. And, I'd imagine, somebody else's interpretation of it could only maybe influence you guys something in the future, right? For me personally, I was, and I could sound like a total poser saying this right now, but I was thinking of Sepultura's Roots because of the tribal elements that are incorporated with that album, and
Right.
So I'd imagine that maybe art comes out of art in a way for you guys, right?
For sure. It's a funny thing on Roots. So obviously that album, while I'm not a fan of that record, like most people aren't, but obviously that record, I think what they're trying to do is get into their Brazilian heritage. So the final song on this record is a piece closely inspired by Kimbanda, which is a Brazilian tradition. So you're actually not on the wrong track by referencing that.
Yeah, I just don't understand why they call that record nu metal. I don't see any nu metal behind that album at all.
And maybe I'll have to revisit it. It's been at least a decade. I remember it not being strong as a teenager, and I probably never visited it since.
Well, did you grow up with Chaos AD and Arise and Beneath the Remains?
It was more Beneath the Remains for me.
Yeah, well, that's why. You don't need to explore it anymore.
Yeah.
Now, you ready for the most difficult question of the whole interview?
Let's do it.
All right. So you have Shattering the Axis Monday, which is a minute long. You have Hideous New Gods, that's 3.5 minutes long. You have Carving the Axis Monday, which is 6.5 minutes long, so you get the point. How do you know when a song is done?
That is a tough one. That is a tough question. I think you don't know when a song is done. You could always add more. It doesn't always serve a purpose. Okay, for example, Carving the Axis Mundi has a bit of a non-linear song structure. There's not a lot of repetition. There's a lot of riffs that link together, but nothing really repeats. It kind of has a continual progress forward. So that song, it was a bit more clear when it was done because we were 6.5 minutes in, like you said. It had gone through the big proggy section, had gone through a very heavy section. We had made it through all of the lyrics that we had scripted out for it. It had guitar solos. It goes back slow. It gets fast again. So it was pretty clear we had reached the arc on that song. But Hideous New Gods was a bit more difficult to say when it was done because the song is only 3 minutes long and the structure is extremely linear. So it is kind of difficult to play. It's basically you have intro, then you have riffs A, B, and C, you have riffs A, B, and C again, and then you have the intro. There's not a lot to it, really. So it was a bit more hard to call it done, but you have to trust your intuition, and I think upon listening back to it, I think that song is perfect at that length. I'm not sure I would have wanted to add more. But to directly answer the question, it's a good question, and I think you don't know when a song is done. Don't you agree with that? I mean, you write music.
I mean, to a degree, but I mean, a producer who I interviewed, who sadly no longer is with us, he said that a song is complete when there's nothing left to take out, which I think is sort of like a good starting point in figuring out when that's done. That's like one of those notes you could take and leave in your back pocket. But I really think it depends on the song. There's parts that you instinctively know that they're done. If you're writing a verse, chorus sort of structure, maybe you'll know, that's when you know, okay, after the third chorus, you're done there. I think there's a technical element, there's a philosophical element. I think it depends on the song and the style of music and really the artist.
Yeah, and it's a tough thing to make a call on. I read a quotation years ago, and it stuck with me since, is that the mark between a professional artist, never mind music, but the mark between a professional artist and an amateur artist is the willingness to be able to call something done. And I think it's so true. I'm sure we all know a couple extremely artistic people who you just wish that they'd be willing to call a project that they've been working on for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, a decade. You just wish that they could call it done. But every time you check in on it, oh no, I gotta add this, I gotta add this. I think what you get out of that is you can always make something, and I'm gonna put this in quotations, better. But I'm not sure that makes it greater. If we listen back to, let's take any classic record, I won't even reference one, just imagine a classic record somewhere between 87 and 92. Could those songs probably be written a little bit better by more mature versions of the band? Absolutely. But would that make the song greater? I'm not sure. So it's just such a subjective thing. And I think at the end, you have to eventually just put the stamp and be like, that's the song. I've delivered what I could. That's the song.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's also sort of the aspect behind it where again, it also depends on the artist, but also if you're trying to capture a moment within your songs or whatever, which I feel like you guys definitely do. If you're trying to capture a moment, sometimes the longer you work on something, the harder it is to maintain that. So you almost kind of, I don't want to say you don't want to rush it by any means, but you also don't want to work on it too long, because then like the spark that would have made it good to begin with isn't there anymore. It's like overcooking a steak. You know
that's
what I mean?
so true. So true. If you're trying to capture some emotion, then if you don't go for that right at the time emotion or time period or something relevant, if you don't get it right then you're just working off the ghost. I totally agree. That's a tough one. That's even harder. Luckily, we I didn't encounter that problem on this one, but I can relate to that. That's a good point.
Yeah, and I have two more questions for you. But is there also, because I am very impressed with the technical elements of the music too, like concept aside and the brutality, I found it very technically impressive. Do you guys have like a background in theory, or like do you have like any sort of classical training that you apply into this music in a way, or are you self-taught outsider artists in a way?
I like a weird blend of both. We don't really have any theoretical knowledge. We all took lessons at some point so long ago that I couldn't even begin to read music anymore or anything like that. But we just rehearse very regularly, and we always have. I mean, up until this quarantine, we probably rehearsed at least 3 times a week, if not 4 or 5 times a week, for the past. I guess it's been a decade now of jamming with Zach, who's the drummer. And when the first record came out and we were younger, 20, and had less responsibilities, we would sometimes jam every day and sometimes twice a day. So we don't really have too much of a background, though we took lessons, but we've just rehearsed a lot. So it's kind of an alternate path to getting proficient, if you can call us that. Luckily, the distortion hides a lot of mistakes.
Yeah. Thank God. Distortion is like duct tape. It fixes everything.
Yeah, exactly. But we actually took some lessons from a very technical band called Archfire.
I love Archfire. I've interviewed them 3 times.
Oh, okay. Yeah, right on. So Zach used to take lessons from Spencer, and I used to take lessons from Dean, that's the lead guitar player and the drummer. So we both took lessons from them for about a year before our first record came out, so that was hugely helpful.
Yeah. To this day, those are some of my favorite guys to interview. I love them. And
oh, cool.
Yeah. Say hi to them for me if you keep in touch.
Yeah, for sure. They live in the same city, and we go way back with them.
Yeah, that's awesome. And those interviews are always hilarious too. I don't understand how like guys who are that hilarious are so technically impressive.
Yeah, they're goofballs for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of like technical nerds like who take themselves way too seriously, who I just think seethe at them because of that. Yeah, and kind of like going back to what you said with practicing and stuff, because there's so many ways that a band approaches it, from songwriting to practicing to, of course, bringing it live in front of an audience. Is there maybe a similar energy that ties in all of those experiences together, or is playing live almost a completely separate art than songwriting?
I think you strive to have it be one all-encompassing thing. Like, everyone puts forward a certain energy, a certain thesis with their band, and you strive that when you rehearse, you're able to enjoy a little bit of that energy on the best jams. When you write, you're channeling that energy, and then you hope you're able to present it in the live arena, and that's obviously the hardest one to replicate it, right? Because the surroundings are different, the people are different, you can't control who is feeling how in the crowd. So I think the endeavor is to try to bring the essence that you're striving for with your band when you play live. I don't think we all hit it all the time. Sometimes it's our fault, sometimes it's circumstances beyond your control, but that should definitely be the goal. The goal should always be that anything to do with a certain musical entity should present the energy of that entity in any setting. Definitely.
And the final question I wanted to ask you is you guys are from Calgary, right?
From Vancouver, actually, a bit further west.
Okay. So, but I've always heard that Canada, regardless of what area or province or city, Canada, it always seems to be a great metal scene everywhere. I mean, since the quarantine started, I interviewed Beneath the Massacre, and I've interviewed Archfire, Threat Signal, so many amazing Canadian bands, Beyond Creation. In Vancouver, how's the scene out there at the moment?
Vancouver's probably, so the two best scenes in Canada are Montreal and Vancouver. Vancouver's probably second place, but we have a very good scene. So myself and the bassist in our band, we put on a couple festivals in Canada called Covenant Festival. So when we do Covenant in Vancouver, it's probably the best of the Covenants because we're based here and we're more established here. But we also do a Covenant Festival in Montreal, and we've been lucky to play some other festivals in Montreal over the years, like Mist and More. And it's got a huge scene, but I think Vancouver's catching up. There's a lot of support for this type of music. I think that this type of music in general is having a very good couple of years. It's having a big moment right now, and I think labels like 20 Buck Spin are a lot to thank for that. But yeah, Vancouver and Montreal are the two big scenes in the country. Across the prairies in the middle, it can get a little bit weak. Like, there are some great bands there, but it's just that there's less people who live there. It's a bit more disconnected. Yeah, but yeah, the coastal scenes are very good.
Yeah, I keep hearing rumors that Edmonton is like having a really good up and coming scene at the moment.
Edmonton has had a weird couple of years, so there's always been a lot of great bands out of that province. That province is Alberta, so if you go back, you have Right Side to Gringollade, obviously, who are a legendary band. You have Revenge, based out of there right now. You have Dire Omen, a band that just called it quits, but was a big relevant band for a long time. And the list goes on and on and on. So Edmonton is weird because you had a big creative surge for a long time there, but they have not been able to get a festival off the ground in Alberta, and like with disastrous levels of failure. Like, there was a festival, we go back to 2013 or 14, called Torment and Fire, promised an enormous lineup. We were booked for that one. That one blew up, and then there was a big fiasco with one that happened last year called Temple of Ascension, and that was an enormous disaster that made internet drama news. That's only two of, I think, 4 or 5 festivals that have fallen apart really badly. So I hope Alberta can do better because they've got a lot of great music, but I think you need things like a regional festival to be the anchor point to truly have a scene. And when I say scene, I define that specifically as a group of artists working together for a prolonged period, not a small blip. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. You should do what you guys should do is you should do like what the hardcore bands used to do here in the United States. You need to do
What's that?
They had like an East Coast, West Coast hardcore sort of thing. You guys need to do that in Canada, like Vancouver versus Montreal. You guys meet up in Toronto and have 2 stages and go back to back.
Not a bad idea.
Yeah, just a thought. The battle of Canada metal.
We'll consider it. The problem is it's a long way to drive.
Yeah. Well, I heard though that's
country makes touring very difficult, right?
Yeah, I've heard that. I was interviewing Travis Montgomery, who plays in Threat Signal and now in Kill the Lights, and he says like Canada is awesome, but it's a pain in the ass to tour there.
Yeah, so that's another big thing why the prairie provinces probably don't have the biggest scenes. It's difficult to go there, and the drives between cities are enormous. Like, I know that the States is a very large country too, but the time between cities is a lot smaller, and the cities are a lot more saturated. So not only do you not have to drive quite as far, but when you get there, you're playing to more people, right? We have 1/10 the population of you guys, and I think our country is significantly larger. So it's difficult with those cross-country drives because it's very hard to tour. That's why bands, including us, will often tour more in Europe than we will in our own country because it's not very viable.
Yeah, I'd imagine. Like, it's funny because when I do in-person interviews, New York is always like in the middle of the tour. So like if they're coming from like Boston or from like Virginia or Pennsylvania, oh yeah, the interview happens on time. If they're coming from Canada the day before, I expect the interview to be delayed by a couple hours.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed this discussion. Is there just anything else with Auroch that you would like to promote in terms of new music? And can you guys maybe be bringing your intensity to the States one day?
We hope we can come to the States again. It's obviously difficult. The visa situation certainly has not gotten any easier, and it was hard to begin with. But we would like to make it back to the States. We had a great time playing in the States throughout 2016. We did a lot. Maybe we'll get those visas again. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, everybody. We are here with Sebastian of Auroch. Be sure to check out their new EP, which is Stolen Angelic Tongues. Feel free to pick that up, out now on 20 Bucks Spin, and we'll see you next time on Heavy New York.